Now, before we get started, how many of you know about GraphQL and microservices? How many of you use them at least, or heard about it? Okay, who did not heard about GraphQL or microservices? Wow, that's almost none. Fair enough. Yeah. Okay, so before we get started, we will watch a simple clip, and I want you to relate this video with Tanya's keynote and also Zain's keynote, and how it relates to us as developers, how as security engineers and as ops engineers. Okay, and this is a classic of Singapore from, I think, Money Know Enough. This clip is from a movie, and I asked one of my friends. Yeah. So I asked my friend, hey, what's your definition of DevSecOps, right? And this is the clip he showed me. Okay, so we're going to watch this video. Can you hear it? Okay, so never mind. So what this video basically says is that there are three people involved in here. One, a salesperson, and another person, two of them are customers. One of the guy who's in the white shirt, t-shirt, is a customer, okay? And he doesn't understand English, and that's why he got someone who can understand and speak English as well. Now,
Okay, Indian next
Indian next.
Indian next. Chinese Okay, I speak English Yeah, my friend want to buy this computer because he want to play in Snack Indian next
Indian next.
Indian next
Internet, you mean, sir?
Yeah. Same I say you also understand
Okay. How many money
How many money?
How many dollar
How many dollar? How much is it, sir?
Yeah, how much?
Depends on your requirement, sir. For this one is very good. The speed is very fast. It got 64 megabyte RAM.
Okay lah. How many money
How much
For this one is $1,999.
哇，錢夠貴啊！
咁貴哎呦，這個臭臭白溝，你真係買唔知來講。
My friend say he go outside smelly can buy 2 computer this price.
Uncle, this is market price. Everywhere is the same.
你繼續講咪叫我 uncle 只係當我砌頭啫喎。
My friend say you don't think you call him uncle you want to chop his vegetable head
Vegetable chop his vegetable head.
Kutuk us
Oh no, I didn't.
你係講啦，你水好我水好，等我熟咧，我係買隻大英機，你繼續講。
Okay, he say you beautiful give him. He also beautiful give you. He shock, he buy a printer for you.
But our printer is always very beautiful. What beautiful are you talking about, sir?
哇！這個當嚟唔好腳咩講10倍9倍俾我聽咧。
你講。
Okay. My friend he big company boss cannot tell right? He want to buy 10 computer for you. You give him low price, cheap. He shock happy. He buy for you. Then your target this year sales you know horse run already.
喂，阿媽有一句話 ，no horse run 咧。
冇國家嘛少走俾嘛，冇俾走人都咪有聽嘛。
你繼續講啦，是冇送我片等我去邊買，繼續講。
Okay, now my friend not happy already. He say if you give me your telephone number he buy computer for you.
你是講我一句話俾我聽先查某唔是講實話Okay, I buy. You no need give me telephone number. I give you telephone number. 你聽未？
喂
how was it? Okay, so I will tell you why I made you watch this at the end of the presentation. So before that, let's get into slides. So I'm Imran. I work for a company called Zendesk with this pretty logo in there, laughing Buddha logo, right? I shouldn't be using this. Actually, I should be using this. We rebranded. Now, I work as a security engineer as part of our product security team, where we make sure that we deliver safe, secure, and reliable software to our customer, like every one of us want to do that. But we want to do that, but we want to do it at scale. It's not that you run scan, let's say, once a month or twice a month. But to give you an idea about our scale, we handle close to 5 million interactions per day, which boils down to 400 million requests, right? And we do it across 158 countries and in 40 different languages. And this you could say from a spoken language, not programming languages as such. So we also use a lot of microservices. So you could say we also use 50 programming languages as well. But this is just to give you an idea of why we would want to operate at scale, right? Now, let's talk about the gold rush, right? We all know that IT is the new gold rush, right? How many of you know what is gold rush? Right? Few of you. Okay, you can relate it. But in fact, people started calling GraphQL as the new gold rush. And people even go as far as saying this is the next big thing after internet or RESTful APIs. And you will see why we say this is the next big thing. Now, before we get into technicalities of what GraphQL is about, let's look at how GraphQL started and why scale is an important part of this. So GraphQL started as a solution for a problem which Facebook had. That most of their clients, mobile clients, were crashing because of the load the APIs are generating on the clients, right? Now, they solved this problem internally, and then they finally open sourced it in 2015 and along with the specification. Now, a year passed by, and they worked closely with GitHub, and they released a version 4 API for GitHub. So GitHub now has 2 APIs, version 3 and version 4. We'll see what those are. And then, as more people started using it, they got more traction. Now they have companies like Pinterest, Spotify, Twitter, and many more using it. You can go look at their page to see what are their customers who are using it, right? And it's really increasing, and we expect that this is going to be increased, and more people are started to use GraphQL, and you will see why in a couple of minutes, right? Now, I'm sorry about this slide, but this is the only slide which will have a lot of text, okay? So to summarize, GraphQL is an API query language, and it's also a runtime which makes your API pretty simple compared to the RESTful APIs, okay? And these are some of the benefits or use cases why you would want to use GraphQL, right? So we can fetch multiple resources in one request. You can also handle different versions more gracefully, and you also have ability to programmatically find out what type of request you can ask to an API. Okay, and it's pretty simple and efficient at use. So let's look into topic 1, which is how it helps us to fetch multiple resources in one request. Okay, and we will do that with an example. So right now, we want to create an API or a tool which scans GitHub to find out secrets in them, right? I shouldn't be asking it, like, did you ever had any incident where you had secrets leaked in your source code? Right? There are a few bunch of hands, right? So it happens. So it's a real problem. Now, you could do this on your own by just using few APIs and few lines of Python code, right? So if I have to write a pseudocode, this is how I would go about it, right? I would fetch a list of repositories, and then I will fetch branches in each repository, and I'll scan them, probably git clone or git fetch, and then scan them, and then finally analyze them for secret. You could use different techniques like regular expression-based techniques, or you can also use entropy-based techniques. There are already tools which does that, right? So let's get started with this. So we'll fetch a list of repositories from GitHub API, okay? And this is how your typical API call looks like. Here we are saying to API, hey, can you fetch all the repositories which are under my username? And this is what a typical response would look like. And by default, GitHub gives you 30 repositories information. which is pretty huge for probably a client in India or in Vietnam or somewhere, some country where the internet connectivity is not so great. Or even if it's so great, the amount of information which we get from a client, from server, is pretty huge for a mobile application. And if I have to zoom into this request, and I deliberately made it not look, yeah. So this is a API call, and this is the response of that API call, wherein we have details like who's the owner of this repository, right? Is it a private repository or not? And then we also have information like what are the different branches it has. So I can go call this API again now to fetch the list of branches. Okay. So let's do a demo and see how would it look like in. Okay. So you have. So this is the same API call. As you can see, I'm fetching all the repositories from GitHub. And again, there's a token which I don't want to disclose to you. Of course, it's set in the environment variable. And when you run it, you can see that it's like the data is huge. And I've already copied this information, and you can see that the amount of information you got is around that much, right? Oh, sorry. As you can see, it's a huge amount of information. Now, the next thing which you would do is go get a list of branches, right? So the first step is done. We've fetched all the repositories which are in our organization or which are in our user. The second step for that is get the branches of each repository so that we can scan all of them to find secrets. If there are any, then we rotate them or we get rid of them, right? This could be the next call, and I'm using the same repository. That's an Ansible role to install Gauntlet. It's one of our tool which helps you automate some of the DevSecOps processes in CI/CD. Yeah, so we're asking them, hey, can you give me all branches, all references in your repository? And then, once we have it, we get this information, right? Like, hey, you have a branch called prod, and you also have different branches like staging, master, or test. And then you have a URL as well. Let's say if you're more interested in finding out the SHA, you're interested in finding what kind of content is it, what was the last message, you can still go query them. But so far, we have made 2 requests. One to get a list of repositories, and one to get a list of branches, right? Two requests. Now, all of this could be done in GraphQL with just 1 request. Just 1 request. And those are the important information there. Like repositories, we're asking them, hey, fetch 30 repositories and give me references as well. So let's see how it would look like in practice, right? So I have to, if I have to, get a list of references, which are basically, okay, so I'm downloading it. As you can see that I have a master branch here, I have a prod branch here, and a staging branch here, and a test branch. Okay, so you can now iterate entire repositories in your organization and scan them, basically. But let's also see how we would do that in version 4 of GitHub library, which is here. So I've already copied this for you, just for the convenience. As you can see that this is the exact same query. I'm not bluffing here, okay? And then I run this query. And this is the real-time data. As you can see, I'm connected. And I got all the information I needed. So I have a security rat, which is another tool, and it has a bunch of branches, master, and then tag 1.4, and a bunch of others. And you will also see here the repositories which I just mentioned, one of my repositories. You can even restrict it to just my repositories by using affiliations as well. So I'm not going to show that demo, but yeah, you could figure it out. So let's go ahead and see, as you can see, that it's clearly pretty efficient when compared to RESTful APIs. So you can fetch multiple APIs in 1 request, multiple resources in 1 request, right? And another problem it solves is handling different versions of an API. Now, how many of you have here 2 different versions of API and 2 different code bases for each of them? I see one hand. Okay, few of you. And it's really nightmare to maintain, legacy code or, babysit probably an old code, right? It's pretty easy. Now, what this allows us to do is that you can have 2 different versions. As I mentioned, RESTful can have 2 versions, version 1, version 2, some even have version 3. And the way you handle, there are multiple ways to handle it. You put it in your URI, or you put it in header, or many techniques are already discussed by a lot of speakers before. But what GraphQL does is that you don't need to mention anything. You just have one API, one URI for both APIs, version 1 or version 2. It doesn't matter. It's just one API call, and you can fetch the data you want. Now, this is the biggest advantage when it comes to versioning and supporting your legacy clients. Let's say, imagine someone here is using iPhone 4, right? Which is version 1 of my API. And version 2 of my API cannot work on version iPhone 4. It would only work on probably, say, iPhone 10, right? These cases, then you don't even have to change your clients to upgrade yourself to the next version. You see? So these are some of the advantages of using GraphQL for versioning. And again, there are some complexities like how would you deprecate few of the obsolete fields. Let's say I want to get rid of planet in next version. So how would I do that? So there are techniques to do that as well. This is one advantage. So those are 2 advantages. Now, the one which I like the most is this, because it directly relates to security, which is if you want to pen test a REST API, what would you do? You go read your APIs, Swagger or any tool which you use. And then you manually create the request and then test it. You use curl or some Zap proxy, or use Selenium along with Zap proxy or Burp Suite, and then you use it. But what GraphQL does is, this is like a modern WSDL, if you know about SOAP. Okay? Kind of similar in terms of WADL as well. So if you don't know what repository the repository resource can return you, you can just query the API to say, hey, I don't understand how to use this. Can you show me how? Right? So it will show you exactly that. So let's see how that works. And I'm doing this impromptu, so yeah, might not work all the time. So let's see. So is it, you guys can see it? Oh. Okay. So I think you can see it. Okay. So what I will do is I will get rid of all of these. Okay. So I just have now 2 things. So I'm saying, hey, I'm interested in Imran's some details. Now I don't know what it supports. So what I would do is just type A. Alphabet starts with A. So then you see, you have a pop-up which says, hey, you have now name in this, you have his email ID in this, and then you can type B, and then you can get my bio as well. Okay? And then I just say, give me the details. And you can see that it went ahead and fetched your details. Not the whole blob, but just the information you need. Similarly, if I just want to look at everything, then you can do that using the previous query as well. So it's pretty easy to do. It's pretty nice as well. And this is the production library, which production website which I'm using. It's not a test environment. As you can see here, it's a live site. It's pretty easy to do that way. And then it's simple and efficient, of course, because we are fetching only the details we need rather than everything. Okay? Now, all of this was just to understand how GraphQL is different from REST API. And unless you can understand an API, how something works, you cannot break it. Right? So this was just information gathering so far. So next step is authentication. So what are the problems we generally see in GraphQL-based APIs? Right? The first problem is, this is not a specific problem to REST API, but just, GraphQL API, but REST in general. But there is a slight difference in terms of how we handle this in RESTful API and the GraphQL APIs. Now, like all subject matter experts, what we do if we don't know anything? We go to Google and say, hey, show me how this is done. And just exactly what we did. Right? And this might be the reply you might get, like saying that, hey, how you do it? However you want. That would be the reply. And GraphQL provides you a lot of, oh, by the way, this is all made up, okay? This is not real. Okay? Yeah. So, yeah. So the GraphQL provides a lot of flexibility for you to do it however you want. And that's the reason why I'm mentioning this, because I've seen developers do it in two different ways. One is that you do at a function level, like you replicate your authentication, authorization at function level. Okay, what could go wrong? Nothing, right? And then you can also do it in a centralized way where you manage your authentication and authorization at one place, and then you handle it, right? So you can use traditional authentication mechanisms like token, JWT, JWE, whatever is your use case, you can use all of them. But the problem is that the typical, this is the workflow of a typical RESTful API or HTTP API, where you can see here that we have authentication middleware here, right? The problem is that GraphQL doesn't have any middleware at all. There's no concept of middleware. So where would you put it, right? That's a big question. Where would you put authentication? Where is the good place to put it? And Facebook doesn't say anything about it, okay? Where to put it? They just give you a broad suggestion that, hey, you need to have authentication, but they will leave the details to you, and that's where the problem is. You don't know where to put. So what we do, we copy paste code from Slack Overflow. Right? That's what will happen. And I've seen this enough times. So this is literally that there's no middle layer at all, no middleware at all. But instead, you have something called resolvers. And resolvers are basically a portion of your code, think it like a function, which binds part of your request to a function. So meaning that, as we've seen before, let's say, for example, this is the one which we saw before, right? We have repositories and we have references. Now, the resolver might be just binding it to this part of your reply, this part of the request query, okay? This might have a separate resolver. This will have a separate resolver as well. So you have a bunch of different resolvers to give you some data, okay? So I will just stop you there, and we'll talk about this in another slide. But just keep in mind that we have different resolvers to do different things. Now, as I was mentioning it, that you can fetch any number of resources, and you can do it in one query. So imagine what would happen if you have nested queries, like query inside, query inside, query inside. Right? Looks like XML bomb. Right? Similar case. So we have problems like denial of service. And this is the most important security issue you should be thinking about. Now, there are different ways to handle it. What would you do? You would either rate limit them, saying that, hey, you cannot have more than 5 requests, or you cannot transact more than 5 MB of data per second or per minute. And then you also have ways to say that calculate the complexity of your query and then see, would it affect our backend? If it is, just politely say, hey, this is too complex, please dumb it down and send it back. This is another way to do it. Now, let's come back to the authorization. Again, I could have latched authentication and authorization, but I wanted to specifically call out the differences between these two. Okay? Now, this is how you might want to resolve it. Like, you have a kind of inheritance kind of a concept here, wherein you will have a base resolver which will just give you a generic error, authentication information required, or authorization information required. But it will not give you specific things. And then you inherit from that. I'm using inherit word very loosely, okay? Don't quote me on that. So then you have, then you can chain this to another resolver where you just do authentication. And you can, again, attach it to another resolver where you do only authorization. And the authorization is so efficient in GraphQL that you can not only do authorization on a whole API level, but you can also do it at a scope field level. Like you can say, hey, your email should never be visible to someone, or your password should never be visible to someone based on their authorization, right, based on their scope. So that's another way to look at it. Like, do go and check it out. Are they using per field authorization if it's needed? Are they using function-based authorization, authentication? Are they using a centralized way to do it? Now, another way, which sadly I don't like it, but that's a reality of how it works, is that instead of you putting your authentication and authorization at API layer, you attach it to your data layer, meaning that whenever you're accessing a data, you make the decision, is he authorized to query this data, right? Something like that. Is authorized is now would be a data layer function, and you call it, and then if it returns true, then you return the data, otherwise you don't. And then finally, error handling. This is like back to 90s kind of a thing, where instead of using your HTTP status codes, which is like 401 or 403, you're unauthorized to access it, you cannot do this in GraphQL. You cannot do this in GraphQL. Why is that? Okay, so we cannot do it because we have nested queries. So when you're returning 402 or 403, which resources among these generated that? So you cannot do that, right? That's why people now resort to the old things. Like you just return every time 200, okay. And then inside the payload, you will have an error mentioning that, hey, you are not authorized to access it. You are not authenticated. Now this raises some questions in automation. How would you find out when a request is successful or when a request is false, right? So you cannot use traditional API-based tools to do this. So you need specific things for this one, okay? And there are a few more things which we'll talk about. Now, GraphQL is predominantly a layer on top of your data layer, but it can also work. Again, you have to go through a lot of hoops to make it work, but it can also work nicely with microservices. And I thought of skipping this, but since most of you don't know about microservices, let me cover this. So microservices is basically a small service, a set of service, an autonomous service, which means that it doesn't need anyone else to do its job. Okay? And it's separately deployable. You can deploy this without worrying about, hey, do I have an authorization function available before I could deploy that? So there is no relationship, or there is no dependency on other services. And because of that, you can scale it hugely. So this would be your typical monolith application towards your left and a microservices towards your right. So you have a big monolithic which does everything, right? You have a UI, you might have API in here, you will also have a data access layer, ORM, or whatever you are using, and then business logic. Now this is pretty difficult to scale, right? How would you scale it? The typical way you scale it, you have a bunch of machines with the same code, right? And then you also have different problems in here, like how would you maintain state? How would you move your users from one machine to another machine, which is a separate topic on its own. But the point is that microservices makes it very easy for you to create services and deploy services and also create business value pretty fast. And a microservice, now the biggest, one of the important questions people ask is how small should be a microservice? There's no definite answer. However, there are some best guidelines. Like if you should be able to recode that entire microservice in 2 weeks or less than that. That's what my definition of microservices. So as you can see, now you have a bunch of small services to accomplish a huge task. And this is how your microservice would look at the end. This is a picture from Netflix. This is how the microservice architecture looks like. So you have a bunch of authentications. I think this is an API gateway, and then you will have a bunch of services in here. And if any one of them crashes, you will have a ripple effect among other ones as well. So you have to be very careful. So it's pretty awesome that you can develop a service in 2 weeks, but it's pretty daunting as well. You have to look at a lot of different things like how do I manage service discovery, how would I manage the communication between these services, etc. Right? Okay. Now, you could definitely use GraphQL, a kind of a API server or API gateway to you act as an API gateway to traverse requests from that gateway, GraphQL to microservices. But it's pretty difficult, and but it's doable, but it's difficult. And similar stuff applies here as well, the complexities, authentication, authorization. Would you rather do authentication and authorization at the microservice level, or would you do it in GraphQL level? So you need to look at that as well. And you will find few interesting issues here as well. Okay. Now, that was the security issues with GraphQL. So let's talk about why is it different to automate GraphQL, right? First thing is this is a new technology. Since it's a new technology, there are no tooling available to you. And static analysis is pretty difficult as well. Okay? Forget about static analysis for a minute because now you don't have. But you can still use your, let's say you have you created GraphQL in Django, or you have created in Python, in Node.js. You can still use that tooling, but it will not give you the entire picture. So we have to, we have to use both the existing tools and also manual code reviews. That's where security working closely with developers comes into play. Okay, and Dast is not as hard as Fast is because you can use the existing automation of the developers to pipe it via Selenium or any automation tool to pass it to a proxy and then scan it. Correct? And then of course, the open source libraries scanning could be done as it is. There's no effect on that. And I'm not covering any of these, but because this is pretty generic and that would also apply to GraphQL. But this is the part which is the CI part of it might change, and you might have to look at it to automate it. You might also have to write abuse test cases to make sure that you're following best practices, your authentication is done right, your authorization is done right. So, yeah. And you have developer tools which will help you ease the pain. One among them is this GraphQL. This is the same software which I showed you earlier in the demo. Even if you don't know anything, you can just play around with it. Nothing would come out of it, but you will learn a ton saying that, oh, this is how the API works, so I can automate it. So you can programmatically now query your API and figure out, okay, he's expecting a string. What if I pass an integer or pass some malicious input into it? So that can be done. Now, and we have done this, okay? And we have done this, and we are doing it at a scale where we run on an average like 20,000 scans per month, which is like 2,000 scans per month on average, and sometimes we go up and that. And we never started like we were able to achieve that because we followed a model which was a modified version of Christian Schneider's presentation in OWASP, wherein he talks about you need to implement DevSecOps security in a stage-wise, in multiple stages. In stage 1, you would put your static analysis, but it will not do anything helpful. It's just running out of the box, not doing anything fancy, and it will throw a lot of false positives. And here, we are not failing our builds. And then you might again go back to the second stage. You can go to the second stage wherein you write custom queries for your SaaS application and then modify it not to throw false positives. Okay? And then similar applies to both dynamic scan. We do unauthenticated scans first just to get rid of low-hanging fruits. And then we also do authenticated scans, right? Which is pretty okay. So that's why the static is 2 here and dynamic is 3 here. It kind of fits nicely with GraphQL. And then we also added a bunch of other verticals to this, thanks to BSIM. So we just copied some of the techniques BSIM uses, and we have modified that. So we also added one more vertical to this called Security Champions, which you already know. So, and we deployed we introduced Security Champions program in stage wise. So we have now Security Champions all over the world, and we run one of the biggest Security Champions program. And these are some of them who are sitting on the second row. And if you can see that we literally believe in shifting left. Okay, that's me, and this is ops, and we have architect here, Tim, and developers and all that. Okay. Yeah. Any questions so far? Yeah. Sure. Yeah, I would share it on Twitter. Okay. So let's move ahead. Now, as Rupali was saying, or Zain was saying, there are tools available for you to do it easily. Now, if you cannot afford to invest anything in security, go buy open source tools. But again, you have to manage them. If you can afford to, go buy a tool and then do it. If you even cannot afford to do either of those because you lack budget, right, go ask your developer friend, hey, I need to automate this, can you help me out? And most often, they would help you out. And even if that is not possible, then you can at least go hire an intern, right? Let them do the work. And they would appreciate you for teaching them security as well. So there's no reason for us now to not implement security. And I would go as far as saying that there's something called auto DevOps. Okay? So what it does is you use the tools, you just flip a button called auto DevOps. This is available in some tools and it's not available in some tools, but you flip a button and it does all this for you. Static analysis, dynamic analysis, it will scan your Docker for your security issues, then it will also do OST scans using open source tools. Okay? So please use those. Now, we saw that many people are skeptical about would it really work? Seriously, can you do that? But yeah, we can definitely do that. As I mentioned, we do about 20,000 scans per month. So we found that there is a need to educate people about DevSecOps, and there was no environment for them to learn it. So we have created one environment for you where you can go learn DevSecOps practices, including static analysis, dynamic analysis, open source integration, patching, a bunch of other free tools. You can go look at the repository, you will find out more details. And it's, of course, open source. It's easy to set up, just takes 3 commands to set up. And then it's pretty reproducible as well. Okay? So please do use them. And I want to end this presentation on this note, which relates directly to the video which I showed. I will not read the slides, but yeah. So the culture of your organization is directly proportional to maturity of your both security DevOps practices. And I can't stress it enough that culture is the biggest impediment for any kind of DevSecOps rollout. So please do, if you're a stakeholder, if you're into management and you have some say, please do work on your culture to make sure that we are more transparent, we are more, we are using more DevOps practices. Okay, thank you. Questions? Sure.
Do you use Open or GraphQL to do pen testing? Because it sounds like it would be pretty great.
Yeah, we could do that, but it's mostly automated using some Python scripts and stuff. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Right now it's manual, yeah.
Thanks, Imran. I have one question regarding how you can make use of this, or like what additional security concerns are added because of GraphQL, because essentially it's a layer on top of microservices or whatever backends there are. So do you think there's anything else that is added in terms of security concerns, like for example introspection, etc.?
It uses something called langsec behind the scenes, so it's pretty secure by default. There's not a lot of issues which are there. But again, all the issues which would pop up in a normal RESTful API might come up as well, like business logic bugs, anything which is not really related to GraphQL. Yeah, it would come up. Yeah. So OWASP top 10, I think, per se, just broadly saying CSRF doesn't apply though. But yeah, so all of those would apply here as well. Any other questions? Okay, thank you for your time, and see you afterwards. Thank you.